There's a photograph that sits in a private album somewhere inside the Sussex household in Montecito, California. In it, a newborn baby boy is wrapped in a white blanket, cradled in the arms of his father. The father is Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, sixth in line to the British throne, grandson of the longest-reigning monarch in British history. The baby is Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, born on May 6, 2019 at the Portland Hospital in London. He is healthy. He is beautiful. And on the very day he entered the world, decisions were already being made behind the closed walls of Buckingham Palace that would follow him for the rest of his life. This is not a story about palace gossip. It is not built on rumors whispered in corridors or claims invented to fill column inches. Everything that follows is drawn from documented court proceedings, verified public statements, the words of Prince Harry himself in his own memoir, and from the findings of journalists who have spent years covering the inner workings of one of the most powerful institutions on earth. This is a story about a child, about his father's fight for him, and about a set of royal rules so old they were written before either of his parents were even born. To understand what happened to Archie, you first have to understand what a letters patent is. Most people have never heard the term. It sounds like something from a different century, and that is because it is. A letters patent is an official written order issued directly by a sovereign. It is one of the most powerful legal tools the British Crown possesses. It requires no vote in Parliament. It requires no public debate. The monarch simply issues one, and it becomes law. In 1917, a particularly significant letters patent was issued by King George V. His declaration reserved prince and princess titles for the children of the monarch, the grandchildren of the monarch in the male line, and the eldest son of the Prince of Wales. It was a tidy system, designed to keep the number of royals with official titles small and manageable. For over a century, it worked exactly as intended. Politi fact. When Prince Harry married Meghan Markle in May 2018, the wedding was watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. It felt to many observers like the royal family was genuinely evolving. Meghan was American. She was biracial. She was a professional with a career and identity and a public platform entirely her own. The palace seemed, at least from the outside, to welcome her with open arms. When Meghan became pregnant with their first child, the question of the baby's title began circulating among royal watchers. Because Archie was Queen Elizabeth II's great-grandson, he was born without the prince title. But he could take the title on in the event that Charles became king. This was a known rule. It applied equally to the children of other royals not in the direct line of succession. Princess Anne's children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, had no royal titles either. The absence of a title was, on its own, not unusual. Politi fact. What made Archie's situation different, according to what Meghan told the world during her landmark 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, was the conversation that took place while she was still pregnant. She described a moment that stunned millions of viewers around the globe. In the months when she was pregnant, she said, there were simultaneous conversations going on in the royal family about three separate things. That Archie would not be given security, that he was not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he was born. She was careful with her words. She said the conversations were relayed to her by Harry. She declined to identify the person or persons who had made the remarks, saying only that revealing their identity would be very damaging to them. CBS News. Harry, sitting beside Meghan during that Oprah interview, said that he found the conversation about his son's potential skin color awkward, and that he was shocked by it. He did not name the individual involved, but through Oprah herself, who confirmed it publicly on CBS this morning the following day, Harry made clear that it was not Queen Elizabeth II, and it was not Prince Philip who had made those remarks. The question of who exactly made those comments has never been officially confirmed. Harry has declined to name the person in any public forum. Deadline. The palace issued a brief statement in response to the Oprah interview, describing the issues raised as concerning matters that would be addressed privately, and noting that recollections may vary. The moment that statement was released, it landed like a stone in still water, because the palace had not denied the conversation happened. It had not categorically stated that no one in the family had said what Meghan described. It had only said that recollections may vary. For many observers, that carefully worded non-denial was itself significant. Royal watchers, journalists, and legal scholars spent weeks picking apart every word of it, and the conversation about what had really happened during those months of Meghan's pregnancy refused to go away. To be fair to the palace's position on the title question, the rules were the rules. Archie was not, under the 1917 letters patent, entitled to be a prince. That was a documented fact. What Meghan raised, however, was not simply that Archie had no title. She raised something far more pointed. Queen Elizabeth II had, in 2012, issued a new decree declaring that all of William's children would get the titles of prince and princess, a move she did not repeat for Archie. The argument Meghan appeared to be making was that this kind of exception had been granted before, for William's children, but had not been granted for hers. She further alleged that while she was still pregnant, members of the royal family said they wanted to change the convention specifically for Archie, which would have prevented him from ever receiving a prince title even after Charles became king. Politi fact, politi fact. This allegation, if true, was deeply significant. It would mean that someone within the institution was not simply following existing rules, but actively working to change those rules in a way that would specifically disadvantage Archie. The palace did not address this claim directly. No official explanation was ever given for why the Queen had chosen to extend titles to all of William's children, but not to Archie. Buckingham Palace remained, as it so often does in moments of controversy, publicly silent. What is documented and verified is this. When Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was born on May 6, 2019, his birth was announced to the world with enormous fanfare. Harry and Meghan brought him before the cameras at Windsor Castle, the proud new parents beaming with joy. He was at that moment styled simply as Master Archie, not His Royal Highness Prince Archie, just Archie. At the time, the palace and many in the press explained this using the 1917 letters patent. It was protocol, they said. It was the rules, nothing unusual. But behind that public explanation, according to what would only emerge years later, something far more complicated was unfolding. Archie spent the first 6 months of his life at Frogmore Cottage in Windsor. By all accounts, he was a cheerful, bright-eyed baby who brought enormous happiness to his parents. But that happiness was wrapped in something else. Tension, uncertainty, the growing sense that the institution surrounding them was not built to accommodate what they represented as a family. The conversations about Archie's skin color, the decision not to extend security to him, the question of whether the rules would ever be changed in his favor. These were not small things. These were the kinds of things that a father carries with him, that a husband carries, and they were building, quietly, towards something that no one inside the palace could fully predict or control. By January 2020, Harry and Meghan announced their intention to step back as senior working members of the royal family. The agreement that followed required them to drop the use of their HRH titles in a working capacity. Harry remained a prince. He remained the Duke of Sussex. But the institutional protections that surrounded the family were gone. Security, funding, the quiet armor of belonging to the working crown. With Archie still barely a year old, his parents were now navigating a world in which they were simultaneously among the most recognized people on the planet, and entirely without the protection that recognition normally required. The palace had agreed to certain terms. Harry and Meghan had agreed to others. And somewhere in the fine print of that arrangement, a clock was ticking. Because the moment Harry's father became king, everything about Archie's status was going to change. The question that nobody inside the institution wanted to answer publicly was exactly how, and whether someone in that institution was already working to ensure it changed in a way that protected the crown rather than the child. Yahoo! By the time Harry and Meghan settled into their new life in Montecito, California, and signed major media deals that would bring their story to the world on their own terms, the groundwork for a much larger legal battle was already being laid. Harry was about to discover that leaving the royal family was not as simple as signing a document and moving across an ocean. There were fights ahead of him, in courtrooms, in newspaper headlines, and in the very institution he had grown up inside, where the rules about his son's identity were still being written, debated, and in some cases, he would later allege, quietly manipulated. The photograph of Archie in his father's arms on the day he was born is a private thing. But the story of what happened to that boy after that photograph was taken is very much public, and it was only just beginning. By the time Queen Elizabeth II died on September 8, 2022, at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, Prince Harry was in London. He had arrived just too late to see her alive. The news broke in the early hours, and within minutes the world had changed. A 70-year reign was over. A new king had taken the throne. And somewhere in the cascade of events that followed, something happened to Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor that had nothing to do with grief. It had to do with the law. Because the moment Charles III became King of England, the 1917 letters patent clicked into place. When his paternal grandfather, King Charles, ascended the throne in September 2022, Archie was entitled to become a prince. The letters patent issued by King George V in 1917 established that the children of the son of a sovereign shall have, and at all times hold, and enjoy the style and title of Royal Highness with the titular dignity of prince or princess. Hello. It was automatic. It required no announcement, no ceremony. No one had to issue a new royal decree. The law, as it had been written over 100 years ago, simply applied. Archie was now entitled to be Prince Archie. His baby sister, Lilibet Diana, born in California in June 2021, was entitled to be Princess Lilibet. The question was whether the palace would allow it, whether the king would sign the formal documents required to make it official, whether the institution would welcome two Sussex children into the fold of titled royalty. And behind closed doors, the answer to that question was anything but straightforward. According to royal biographer Tom Bower, writing in his book Betrayal, in the days following Queen Elizabeth's death, King Charles resisted the temptation to strip the couple of their titles and declare Harry an outcast. His mother would not have approved. But he did disinvite the Sussexes from a Buckingham Palace reception before the funeral for heads of state, 1,000 guests, because it was only for working royals. And in those same days, Charles sidelined his son's insistence that he sign the letters patent, the official legal documents, to formally create his children Archie and Lilibet as their Royal Highnesses Prince and Princess. Hello. Let that sit for a moment. In the days immediately following Queen Elizabeth's death, when the country was in mourning and the eyes of the world were on the royal family, the question of whether Archie and Lilibet would be formally recognized as Prince and Princess was being used, at least in part, as a matter of negotiation. The documents that would have confirmed their birthright status were not being signed, and Harry was being told, implicitly or explicitly, that certain things would happen if other certain things did not happen first. It was reported that King Charles planned to give Archie and Lilibet the titles of Prince and Princess, but deny them the honorific Royal Highness styling. Multiple news outlets reported behind-the-scenes arguments between the king and the Sussexes, with Harry and Meghan described as relentless since the Queen's death and furious over their children being denied HRH status. BuzzFeed News. There was also, according to reporting at the time, a wider calculation being made inside the palace about Harry's behavior and how it would intersect with his children's futures. A source close to the king said that the decision about Archie and Lilibet's titles depended a lot on what happened in the coming months, specifically with Harry's announced memoirs, likely to be published before the end of the year. In other words, the birthright of two children was being linked in private discussions at least to whether their father was going to write a book about his family. The titles were not simply a matter of law. They had become a matter of leverage. BuzzFeed News. This was the environment Harry was navigating in the months after his grandmother died. Grief on one side, institutional pressure on the other, his children's future identities being discussed in terms of his own behavior and his forthcoming book. And at the same time, a separate and entirely different legal battle was quietly advancing toward its first major courtroom appearance. Because Harry had not only been fighting over titles, he had been fighting over something far more fundamental. He had been fighting for the right to protect his children physically, to keep them safe, to bring them to the country where he was born without having to fear for their lives. The security question had begun in 2020 when Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties. Under the arrangement negotiated with the palace, Harry lost his automatic right to state-funded police protection in the United Kingdom. This was not a small thing. It was not a matter of protocol. Harry had made clear in multiple public statements and later in court filings that the threats against him were real, documented, and ongoing. In 2020, Al-Qaeda reportedly called for his assassination. He had also been threatened by neo-Nazi and other extremist groups. In 2021 and 2023, in London and New York respectively, he was hounded by paparazzi. And always, underneath every security conversation, there was the shadow of what had happened to his mother. Princess Diana had been killed in Paris in 1997 when the car she was traveling in, pursued by paparazzi through the streets of the city, crashed inside a tunnel. Harry had grown up with that knowledge. He carried it every single day. And when he looked at his children, he was not going to accept any arrangement that left them exposed to the same risks. CBS News. In 2022, Harry asked for a judicial review after England's Home Office said private individuals cannot use state security even if they offer to pay for it themselves. Nearly 1 year later, in May 2023, Harry's request to privately pay police officers to protect his family while in the United Kingdom was denied. He had offered to fund the protection himself. He was not asking the British taxpayer to cover the cost. He simply wanted to be able to hire the police officers who knew the British threat landscape, who understood the protocols, who could keep his family safe on British soil. The Home Office said no. The body responsible for making security assessments, known as RAVEC, had reviewed his case and concluded that he did not qualify for the kind of protection he was requesting. Harry went to court. Yahoo! In December 2023, Harry stood inside the High Court in London and made a statement that was about as direct as any statement a royal has ever made in a public courtroom. He told the court, "The UK is central to the heritage of my children and a place I want them to feel at home as much as where they live at the moment in the US. That cannot happen if it's not possible to keep them safe when they are on UK soil." It was a simple statement. It was the statement of a father. Not a duke, not a prince. A father who wanted to bring his children home for Christmas, for birthdays, for the funerals of grandparents and the coronations of kings, without having to calculate whether doing so might get them killed. Hello. Prince Archie, who turned 6 in May of that year, and Princess Lilibet, aged 3, had last visited the United Kingdom in June 2022, which coincided with the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations and Lilibet's first birthday. That had been their last trip to Britain. Because after the security arrangement collapsed, after the legal challenges began, Harry and Meghan made the decision that they could not take the risk of bringing their children back without a formal protection agreement in place. Archie had last set foot in the country of his birth as a 3-year-old child. He would grow up in California, raised on stories of a Britain he could not safely visit. Hello. Meanwhile, in early 2023, Harry's memoir was published. It was called Spare, and it became the fastest-selling nonfiction book in history. In it, Harry did not hold back. He described the breakdown of his relationship with his brother William in detail. He wrote about feeling like the expendable second son, the spare to the heir, surplus to requirements. He described the pain of watching Meghan struggle within the institution and feeling that no one around him was willing to help. He dedicated the book to his wife and his 2 children. And the moment it was published, the palace's fury was, by many accounts, significant. In March 2023, months after Charles had become king, and months after Harry and Meghan had already begun using their children's royal titles, the Sussex spokesperson confirmed publicly what had apparently been settled in private. The spokesperson said that the children's titles had been a birthright since their grandfather became monarch, and that the matter had been settled for some time in alignment with Buckingham Palace. Archie was now, officially, Prince Archie. Lilibet was Princess Lilibet. Their names were updated on the Sussex website. The titles were real, royal insider. But titles alone did not solve the larger problem. Because Archie could be called Prince Archie every day of his life, and it would not change the fact that he could not visit the country that title connected him to without his father being forced to navigate a legal and logistical nightmare. The security case was still in the courts. Harry had lost the first round and was preparing an appeal. His children remained in California. And the institution that had spent months debating whether to formally acknowledge their titles had done nothing to address the security question that was keeping them away. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary situation. 2 children with royal titles, born of royal blood, descended from the longest-reigning monarch in British history, were effectively unable to come home. Not because of anything they had done, because of the war between their father and the institution he had once been part of. And that war, as Harry was about to discover when his final security appeal came before the courts, was far from over. On the morning of May 2, 2025, a ruling was handed down from the Court of Appeal in London. Harry was not in the courtroom. He had not appeared in person for the judgment. The ruling was delivered by Sir Geoffrey Voss, the Master of the Rolls, one of the most senior judges in England and Wales, and the judgment went against Harry. Sir Geoffrey Voss dismissed the appeal, stating that Harry's sense of grievance did not constitute a legal basis to overturn the prior decision. The court found that the government body responsible for assessing Harry's security needs had not acted unlawfully. The process had been followed. The outcome, however unfair it may have felt to a father who believed his children were at risk, had been reached by legitimate means. This judgment reinforced a previous legal defeat in 2024, where the High Court had upheld the 2020 decision to downgrade his security. It also signaled the end of Harry's legal options in this matter, barring a new line of challenge. London Daily, London Daily. Harry had been fighting this battle for 5 years. He had filed for judicial review. He had been denied. He had appealed. He had appeared in court in person. He had made emotional statements before judges. He had offered to pay for the protection himself. And in the end, every legal avenue had closed. The British court system had ruled at every level that the decision to remove his government-funded police protection had been lawful. His sense of grievance, the phrase the judge used, was real. The danger he described was real, but it was not, in the legal view of the court, sufficient grounds to reverse the decision. The reaction from Harry was swift and personal. Just days after the ruling, he sat down for an interview with the BBC. He told the interviewer that he cannot see a world in which he would bring his wife and children back to the United Kingdom at this point. He added that he loves his country, and he always has done, despite what some people in that country have done. It was a sentence full of weight. A sentence that had been building for years. It was the sentence of a man who had grown up in Britain, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan wearing the British uniform, who had built the Invictus Games as a tribute to the service personnel he had served alongside, and who was now standing on the other side of an ocean looking back at a country he described as his own but could not safely return to with his family. Yahoo! Archie, by this point, was 6 years old. He had last been to Britain 3 years earlier as a toddler. He was growing up in the sunshine of California, raised by 2 parents who loved him fiercely, surrounded by a life that was by any material measure comfortable and stable. But he could not visit his grandfather, the king, without a security apparatus around his father that the British government refused to provide. He could not walk the streets of London, where his parents had once lived. He could not visit the palace gardens he had briefly called home as an infant. He was a child with a prince's title and a grandmother buried in Windsor and a king for a grandfather. And yet the simple act of coming home was something that required a legal strategy and a risk assessment. The security ruling was not the only legal front Harry was fighting on during this period. He had also been locked in a long-running battle against British tabloid newspapers, specifically against the publishers of titles he believed had illegally obtained private information about him and his family over many years. This was not a battle he had picked lightly. It was personal. It was connected in his mind to the way the press had treated his mother. A throughline throughout his memoir was his deep and constant fury at the media, which he believed helped kill his mother, Princess Diana, persecuted the royals, and waged a ruthless campaign against Meghan. NBC News. Harry is also suing News Group newspapers, which owns The Sun, for alleged unlawful information gathering for stories published in the company's tabloids. In April 2023, Harry also claimed that his brother Prince William settled with NGN for a very large sum in 2020. In a court filing, he alleged that the royal family had a secret agreement with NGN which prevented members of the royal family from filing lawsuits against the company. This was an explosive claim. It alleged that the institution Harry had grown up inside had made a secret arrangement with the newspaper group that had, by Harry's account, made his family's life a misery. The palace denied the claims. The newspaper group denied the claims, but the allegation was now part of the public record, filed in a British court, carrying the weight of legal procedure behind it. Yahoo! In July 2026, the court delivered its ruling in Harry's case against Associated Newspapers Limited. His wife Meghan and their children Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet did not accompany the Duke to London over security concerns. That detail alone tells the full story of where things stood. Harry could come to Britain alone. He could navigate the risks on his own terms, but bringing his children, bringing his family, remained something he was not willing to do without protections that he had been unable to secure through 5 years of legal action. CNN. Through all of this, there were also developments on the family front that offered something approaching hope, even as the institutional battles continued. Harry and King Charles III sat down together for a closed-door meeting in September 2025. This marked the first time the father and son were in the same room since Charles had been diagnosed with cancer in 2024. The meeting was private. No details were released. No joint statement was issued. But the fact that it happened, that the two men sat together and spoke, was significant in itself. Because for the previous 2 years, the relationship between Harry and his father had been, by multiple accounts, effectively non-existent. Phone calls that went unanswered, letters that received no response, a rift that had widened with each public disclosure, each memoir revelation, each court filing. Yahoo! The king's cancer diagnosis in 2024 had changed something. It had changed it for Harry, who spoke publicly about his concern for his father, and it appeared in some measure to have changed it for Charles as well, who had perhaps come to the conclusion that the time available to repair things was not infinite, and that whatever had passed between them, this was still his son. The September 2025 meeting did not resolve the broader Sussex crisis. It did not restore Harry's security protection or bring Archie back to Britain, but it was a step. It was two people, bound by blood and by a shared history of enormous pain, sitting across from each other and choosing, for at least one afternoon, to be in the same room. By early 2026, there were signs that the security situation might finally be moving toward resolution. By December 2025, RAVEC had instructed their risk management board to conduct an official review of Harry's threat level when he is traveling to the United Kingdom. A report allegedly found Harry was eligible for armed protection while traveling home. A source claimed that the only thing that could prevent his approval now would be an intervention from the palace. It was not a confirmation. It was not a guarantee. But it was the first concrete indication in years that the machinery of the British state was reconsidering its position. That someone inside the system had looked at the evidence, at the documented threats, at the 5 years of legal wrangling, and concluded that perhaps the original decision had not been correct. Yahoo! What does all of this mean for Archie? For a 7-year-old boy who has grown up in California, who knows his grandfather is a king, who knows his father fought for years in British courts for the right to bring him home safely. What does it mean that his title, his legal birthright, was not formally confirmed until months after his grandfather became the monarch? That the documents that would have made it official, the letters patent, were not signed in the days after Queen Elizabeth's death, but were instead sidelined while institutional negotiations proceeded. That the conversations about his skin color, relayed to his mother while she was still pregnant with him, were never fully addressed by anyone in the institution with the authority to address them. According to Harry himself, Archie has expressed interest in being an astronaut or a pilot. At the opening of the 2022 Invictus Games, Harry said that what he reminds his son is that no matter what you want to be when you grow up, it is your character that matters most, and nothing would make his mum and him prouder than to see him have the character of the Invictus competitors he sees before him. It is the kind of thing a father says when he is trying to give his child something solid to stand on. An identity that is not built on a title or a palace or a bloodline, but on who you choose to become. Hello. The royal lawyers, the letters patent, the courtroom battles, the security assessments, the private meetings, and the public silences. All of it surrounds this one boy who did nothing to cause any of it and had no say in any of it. He was born into a story already in progress. He inherited a title he did not ask for, connected to an institution that spent the first years of his life debating whether he deserved it. He lost the right to safely visit his birth country before he was old enough to understand what a country even was. What history will make of this chapter in the life of the House of Windsor is not yet clear. The institutions that shape royal life move slowly. Reconciliations, when they come, tend to be quiet. The fires that burned between Harry and the palace have not gone out. But they may, for the first time in years, be burning at a slightly lower temperature. The meeting between Harry and Charles in September 2025 was a beginning. The renewed security review was a beginning. Whether Archie will one day walk through the gates of Windsor Castle as a boy who belongs there, not as a visiting relative navigating a security briefing, but as someone who simply comes home, remains to be seen. What is certain is this: he is a prince. He holds a title written into the laws of a kingdom he has barely seen. His father fought for that title in courtrooms. His mother described conversations about his very appearance before he was born in a televised interview watched by hundreds of millions of people. His grandfather is the King of England, and they have barely been in the same room. And his father, who walked away from that same institution carrying wounds that took years to name, has never stopped trying to build something better for his children, something safer, something more honest. Whatever the future holds for the Sussex family, the story of Archie is not finished. It is, in many ways, barely begun.